Hello there, welcome to the Outside Views weekly magazine on global politics. And today we start in the UK. After a dramatic night in Westminster, British Prime Minister Liz Truss' situation is more precarious than ever. The Conservative head of government lost her second cabinet member within a few days on Wednesday with the resignation of Home Secretary Suella Braverman. A later vote in the House of Commons unfolded chaotic scenes in which Truss and the government continued to lose authority. The head of government, who has only been in office for 6 weeks now, has been fighting for a post since she triggered financial chaos with planned tax cuts, and she had to make a big U-turn, and not only one. But now Truss is threatened primarily by signs of disintegration in her government and faction. Braverman used her resignation letter to settle accounts with the PM. Important promises to voters have been broken, and she also has great concerns about this administration's commitment to their election manifesto, such as limiting the total number of immigrants and stopping illegal migration, particularly the dangerous road crossings. That's what Braverman wrote. It was expected that the former Interior Minister would want to add more when she spoke in Parliament on Thursday. Braverman belongs to the extreme right wing of the party. She repeatedly made a name for herself with statements about the plans for tougher approach to deportations. She recently railed against tofu-eating leftists in Parliament. Truss appointed former Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who until recently had been one of her opponents, to succeed Braverman. Braverman gave a technical breach of confidentiality rules as the reason for her resignation. She forwarded an official document from her personal email address to a trusted parliamentary colleague, is what Braverman wrote. The hustle and bustle surrounding Braverman was followed by chaotic scenes in Parliament that did not exist even at the time of the Brexit dispute under ex-Prime Minister Theresa May. The framework for this was provided by the vote on a motion tabled by the opposition Labour Party, which was intended to pave the way for a ban on fracking. The government had initially declared the vote a vote of confidence before rowing back just before voting began. Although Labour's motion was defeated by a large majority, many Conservative MPs are said to have been extremely reluctant to vote against the proposal. There were also quite a few abstentions. According to consistent reports, Chief Whip Wendy Morton and her deputy Craig Whittaker initially resigned out of frustration at the government's U-turn on whether the vote counted as a vote of confidence. Downing Street, the seat of government, later announced that both were still in office. Labour MP Chris Bryant and other members of the opposition also accused Conservative MPs of being pushed in a certain direction, sometimes with shouts and shoves, and that they were not able to vote freely and unhindered. And after the last US presidential election, Donald Trump postulated the myth of alleged election fraud. He's now facing trial for this. Former US President Donald Trump could soon be put on trial. A group of prosecutors at the US Department of Justice believes there is sufficient evidence to charge Trump with obstruction of justice. This was reported by the US portal Bloomberg. However, insiders said there is no official recommendation from the group to Attorney General Merrick Garland. Garland must therefore agree or reject an indictment against the ex-president. However, it is unlikely that Trump will be charged solely with obstruction of justice, the insiders reported. The same sources also stated that it was unlikely that charges would be brought in the near future. Nothing will happen before the midterm elections on November 8th. According to the report, if Donald Trump is really put on trial, the charges will not be brought until after the Christmas holidays. An obstruction of justice charge would be a hit, said Frank Figliuzzi, a former FBI deputy director of counterintelligence. I think he will be charged, said Figliuzzi. He believes that could happen by the end of the year. The insider said it was unlikely that the decision on whether to indict Trump before Christmas would be made for several reasons. On the one hand, the Justice Department is still investigating the case of the government documents found in Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. On the other hand, there are still some political and criminal law issues that need to be clarified beforehand. Ex-President Trump knowingly provided false information in court documents about alleged election fraud. Among other things, he and his companions in the state of Georgia had sued against the results of the 2020 presidential election. They claimed that 10,315 votes from deceased people were counted in Fulton County. Trump's attorney John Eastman wrote in an email after Trump's claim that the Republican had been advised that some of the statements were incorrect. Nevertheless, Trump and his lawyers filed the lawsuit with the same incorrect numbers, said California Judge David Carter. And Trump also assured under oath that all the information was correct to the best of his knowledge. The emails demonstrate that President Trump knew these particular voter fraud numbers were incorrect, but continued to disseminate them both in court documents and to the public, wrote California Judge David Carter. And Eastman's emails are related to a conspiracy to defraud the United States. Eastman is now scheduled to submit 33 documents to the investigation committee by October 28th. And Russian drones are increasingly violating overflight bans in Norway. And now the son of a prominent oligarch has apparently been caught. The Norwegian police have arrested the son of the former Russian railway chief and Putin confidant Vladimir Yakunin for illegal drone flights over Svalbard. Andrei Yakunin was arrested on Monday in Hammerfest in northern Norway. That's what the police said on Wednesday. The Russian-British citizen admitted to illegally piloting a drone over the Norwegian Arctic archipelago of Spitsbergen, a police official said. Yakunin is in custody. Drones and other electronic devices have been confiscated, they said. It is the 7th arrest of Russian citizens within a few days. They are accused of illegally operating unmanned aerial vehicles or taking illicit photographs in Norway, which borders Russia and is now Europe's largest gas supplier. In connection with further drone flights near Norwegian airports, Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre told broadcaster NRK on Wednesday, "It is unacceptable that foreign secret services fly drones over Norwegian airports." The Russians do not have the right to fly drones over Norway, he added. A few hours earlier, a drone flight near Bergen Airport in the west of the country had caused a brief disruption to air traffic. Like other Western countries, Norway imposed an overflight ban on Russians in response to the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine. Violations are punishable by up to 3 years in prison. And in Norway, drones have repeatedly been sighted on energy infrastructure, including an offshore oil and gas platform. These reports and the sabotage of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea have prompted the country to step up its security measures. Svalbard is 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole and is Norwegian territory. Since Russia also mines coal on the archipelago, it is home to a relatively large Russian community. And fears are growing in France that strikes in nuclear power plants could jeopardize electricity production. And Germany should come to the aid of its neighbors. France's power grid operator RTE sees the country's security of supply before the crisis winter possibly at risk due to strikes in nuclear power plants. After up to half of the 56 French nuclear power plants were offline for maintenance, strikes have now led to delays of several weeks in the restarting of some of the power plants RTE announced in Paris on Tuesday. An extension of the labor dispute would have a significant impact on the core of the winter, says an analysis by the network operator. At least 6 reactors, which should be back online at the end of October, are affected by the strikes. The reason for the many power plants that have been shut down and that is postponed maintenance during the corona crisis, which is now being made up for, and corrosion problems for which around a dozen power plants are being checked. Initially, the work had progressed according to plan, but now the strikes by power plant personnel were jeopardizing the startup of as many nuclear power plants as possible before winter, wrote RTE. As a result, there is a very weak risk for the security of supply for the second half of October and a moderate risk for the beginning of November. Due to feared supply bottlenecks, France has agreed to supply electricity from Germany and, in return, has been supplying natural gas to Germany since last Thursday. France has filled 98% of its own gas storage facilities since the end of last week. According to the RTE analysis, France has less to worry about when it comes to its gas supply. Even with a cold winter, the austerity appeals to the populations were sufficient to prevent problems. And meanwhile, according to RTE, electricity consumption in France has fallen by 5% compared to before the corona crisis. Measured against the first half of the year, the decline in September was 3 to 4%. In industry, the decline was 8 to 9%. In addition to the nuclear power plants, other production facilities in France are also on strike. After weeks of industrial action in France's major refineries, unions extended strikes on Tuesday in a fight for higher wages. In addition to petrol stations, public areas such as schools and transport are now also affected. Despite the first agreement reached on Friday, the left-wing union CGT and the oil and gas company Total Energies called for work stoppages for the 4th week in a row. The agreed wage increase of 7% plus bonus is not sufficient in view of the inflation and huge profits of the group, it said. And is China preparing for war against Western armies? A revelation by the UK Ministry of Defence suggests so. The British Ministry of Defence is alarmed by the Chinese military's recruitment of Western fighter pilots. British media report that around 30 active and former members of the Royal Air Force are currently in China to educate the People's Liberation Army about the weaknesses of Western fighter jets and helicopters and to teach them defense methods. The Chinese aren't interested in training their own pilots on Western jets. That's what Sky News quoted as saying in background talks with Defense Ministry officials. Instead, experienced Western pilots are supposed to teach the Chinese Air Force tactics so that they can fight Western aircraft in the event of a conflict. So far, there's no evidence that the pilots involved have betrayed military secrets. Nevertheless, the ministry will now issue a warning to alert pilots to the consequences of an operation for China. These activities would certainly damage the defense capability of Britain and our allies if we do nothing about it. That's how Sky News quoted from the background discussion. There are no legal means to prevent pilots from working for China. Therefore, the ministry can only appeal to the sense of responsibility and patriotism of the pilots. Pilots only made themselves punishable if they betrayed military secrets. Apparently, the Chinese recruitment attempts are not only aimed at pilots, but also at members of the army and navy, as well as at pilots from other NATO armies. The Chinese are also targeting, for example, specialists for fighter jets such as the Harrier, the Typhoon or Tornado, which the Bundeswehr also uses. Too much Star Wars. London also sees the Chinese efforts to recruit pilots with experience in the F-35, the most modern US fighter jet, with many allied armies, including the Bundeswehr, want to take over. And so far, however, China has not been able to recruit F-35 pilots. The Ministry of Defense has been observing the Chinese efforts since the end of 2019, but since the end of the corona measures in Europe, they have intensified. That's at least what The Guardian reports from the background discussion. For recruitment, China used the services of a South African company whose recruiters specifically approached the military and lured them with a fee of 275,000 euros for a few weeks of work. We are now stepping up our countermeasures, also so that China does not interpret our previous silence as tacit understanding, said one of the officials. These recruitment attempts are a threat to British and Western interests, which we view with concern and disapproval. The topic has become even more explosive as a result of the recently growing tensions surrounding the island state of Taiwan, which Beijing regards as a renegade province and is threatening militarily. China will never rule out the use of force against Taiwan. That's what head of state Xi Jinping said on Sunday at the 20th Communist Party Congress. And Australia is making a U-turn in dealing with the Middle East conflict. Canberra says the city status of Jerusalem is unclear and Israel reacts disappointed. So Australia reverses recognition of West Jerusalem as the Israeli capital after a few years. Foreign Minister Penny Wong justified this on Tuesday in Canberra by saying that the status of Jerusalem should be decided in peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. The Australian embassy has always been in Tel Aviv and will remain there. Australia wants a two-state solution in which Israel and a Palestinian state get along in peace and security. Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid expressed his disappointment. He spoke of a hasty decision. We can only hope that the Australian government will take other matters more seriously and professionally. Jerusalem is the eternal and united capital of Israel, and nothing will ever change that, he said. The Foreign Ministry announced that it would summon the Australian ambassador. Australia's new government of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese changes the course of predecessor Scott Morrison with a decision. In December 2018, he recognized West Jerusalem as the Israeli capital, but left the embassy in Tel Aviv. In addition, he had pledged to recognize a future Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital once a lasting two-state solution was achieved. Palestinians had criticized the decision at the time. Israel spoke of a step in the right direction then. Earlier in 2017, under then-President Donald Trump, the United States recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The transfer was an affront to the Palestinians. Israel conquered East Jerusalem in the 1967 Six-Day War. And that ends today's weekly magazine. I hope I put a selection together that you find interesting, but those were the topics I was really thinking everybody should know about this week. And it helps everyone, I hope, to look over what we say, the edge of your own plate, so you get a little bit of a wider view. I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.